welcome to the channel. Two wars. Many believe that Russian fascists are merely puppets of Hitler's Germany or participants in the armed formations of the Third Reich. But in reality, there was also a completely independent Russian Fascist Party, independent of Hitler. It originated in a time when the words fascist and Nazi had not yet become pejorative, and the supporters of this ideology had not yet tarnished themselves with war crimes. Patriotic nationalist movements gained immense popularity among many nations in the second half of the 1920s. Russians were also not immune to this harmful fascination with the ideas of their nation's superiority over others. Of course, at that time in the USSR, there was only one party, the All-Union Communist Party, Bolsheviks, and the emergence of others was impossible. However, among the white émigrés, there were individuals who not only became fascinated with the ideas of great Russian nationalism, but also founded a sufficiently powerful political movement of an extreme right orientation, the Russian fascist community, active from the 1920s until 1943, reached its peak in 1938 and had more than 30,000 members. Not all white émigrés settled in Europe after the Civil War. Many opponents of Bolshevism also settled in Manchuria, in northern China. After all, there had been a very strong and numerous Russian diaspora in this region for many years. In reaction to the defeat of the white movement, there were persistent attempts by émigrés to find any means of combating communist ideology in the Soviet Union and to propose an alternative to this ideology. The founders of the Russian Fascist Party were greatly impressed by the personality of Benito Mussolini. At that time, Mussolini was at the height of his glory, and many imitated him in various countries. The center of Russian fascism became the city of Harbin in Manchuria. In 1914, Russians made up 64.5% of the 70,000 population of the city, and after the Civil War, their numbers increased more than fivefold. The ideological foundation of Russian fascism was laid by Professor Nikolai Ivanovich Nikiforov, the dean of the Harbin Law Faculty. His colleague, historian Goryakin, published a book titled The First Russian Fascists about Todor Arkadyevich Stolypin in Harbin in 1928. In it, he argued that the popular Russian prime minister, who was killed by revolutionaries, was essentially a fascist, having preceded Benito Mussolini by many years. But besides theorists, the Russian fascist movement needed an energetic leader, skilled in oratory, according to all the canons of the genre. And such a person was found. The local Führer became Konstantin Radzevsky, a native of Blagoveshchensk. Interestingly, this person had no relation to the white émigrés. He was even a member of the Komsomol. In 1925, at the age of 18, Radzevsky fled the USSR to Harbin, where he was inspired by the idea of Russian fascism during Nikolai Ivanovich Nikiforov's lectures and became the leader of a nationalist student organization. Radzevsky was a skilled propagandist and organizer, a convinced anti-communist, and his ideas resonated with many Russian émigrés. Like the Italian black shirts, the Russian fascists from Harbin created a black uniform for themselves and wore shoulder belts. In just a few years, the small university organization of Harbin Fascists grew into a full-fledged Russian Fascist Party by 1931. Its founding congress opened on May 26, 1931, in Harbin. The party programs foretold the inevitable collapse of the Bolshevik regime in the USSR. Most white émigrés in Manchuria lived in poverty and dreamed of returning to Russia. Therefore, this ideology worked exceptionally well among them. In the first 4 years of its existence, the Russian Fascist Party attracted as many as 20,000 people under its banner. Of course, this was also facilitated by the undeniable successes of the fascists in Europe. Germany and Italy, where nationalist parties had taken power, were experiencing a vigorous rise. Such a significant political force could not go unnoticed in other countries. In 1933, among the white émigrés living in the United States, a pan-Russian fascist organization was founded by former cadet of the Nikolaev Cavalry School, Anastasia Vansaitsky. It was small in number, but it had solid financial resources. Vansaitsky was married to the millionaire Marion Buckingham. He arrived in Harbin, and in April 1934, the merger of two movements was announced, leading to the establishment of the All-Russian Fascist Party of global scale. Radzevsky remained the general's secretary. However, the American broke away from him after just a year. He was an anti-communist, but not an anti-Semite. Besides Manchuria, branches opened in Europe between 1934 and 1938 and 1938. They opened in many countries in Europe, with trends in Latin America, North Africa, the United States, Canada, and Australia, wherever Russian white émigrés lived. The party's symbolism included the swastika, the double-headed eagle, and other imperial symbols. The greeting resembled that of Hitler. The right hand was raised from the heart to the sky with the words, "Glory to Russia." The All-Russian Fascist Party published magazines and 2 newspapers, established a women's organization, and created its own equivalent of Hitler Youth, the Union of Young Fascist Avant-Garde. Radzevsky confidently promised from the podium that the people of the USSR would sweep away the Bolshevik regime by no later than 1938, and that they would help him in this. Agitators of the Russian Fascist Party entered the territory of the Soviet Union to distribute leaflets. while its militants joined the Japanese in their battles against the Red Army at Kazan and Kochanjiol. However, there were very few among the Russian fascists who genuinely wanted to fight rather than just engage in rhetoric. Nevertheless, the agitation yielded no results, and hopes for a Japanese invasion of the USSR also did not materialize. The years 1938 to 1939 passed, and the Bolshevik regime in the USSR not only did not collapse but grew stronger and more authoritarian. Radzevsky's promises remained empty words, and the popularity of the party and its Führer began to decline rapidly. Moreover, the Japanese, who had been in control of Manchuria after the Civil War and initially treated the Russian fascists with loyalty, began to oppress them in the late 1930s. The speeches of Radzevsky, who called for an attack on the USSR, got on the nerves of the Japanese after their brutal defeat by the Bolsheviks at Kochanjiol. Russian fascists in other countries also fizzled out. Mansiatsky was immediately imprisoned after the US entered the war, and after his release in 1946, he no longer wanted any political activity. The Japanese also arrested Radzevsky, but after some time, they released him, although his party was strictly banned. Everything related to it was banned, including uniforms, symbols, marching, singing Russian patriotic songs, and so on. At the end of the war, Radzevsky renounced his previous views. He began to praise Stalin and the policies of the All-Union Communist Party, Bolsheviks, publicly stating that he wanted to return to his homeland. Friends and relatives pleaded with him to reconsider until the very last day, but to no avail. After the victory of the Red Army over the Japanese in August 1945, Radzevsky expressed his desire to return to the USSR and become a Soviet citizen at the Soviet embassy. He requested guarantees of inviolability. They were provided to him. But as soon as Radzevsky crossed the border, he was arrested and transported to Moscow. A few months later, he was executed by the verdict of a Soviet court. Thus ended the era of Russian fascism, which was generally not discussed during Soviet times. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, books written by Konstantin Radzevsky were published in modern Russia. However, in 2010, they were included in the federal list of extremist materials and banned on the territory of the Russian Federation. What do you think? Can Radzevsky be classified as a classic fascist or Nazi? Share your opinion in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to my channel.